I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Joe Wright.
So I think the big question for Jaguar is, where does this end up in the long term? That's where a brand either succeeds or fails. It's not about this sudden moment we're in now where everyone's talking about Jaguar, and at the end of the day, that you could argue is a good thing for them. I think it's really what happens to the brand when all of this dies down. Where is it in 10 years' time? And at the end of the day, brands are either icons or they're challengers.
Joe Wright is co-founder, director, and chief creative officer at Sibling Rivalry, a New York and Los Angeles-based brand studio and production company infusing insight with imagination to drive brand, business, and culture. Joe is a meticulous craftsman who designs every detail to impact the greater story of his films. As a co-founder and chief creative officer of Sibling Rivalry, Joe's work brings the audience on a journey of striking imagery and authentic storytelling. He's collaborated with brands such as Cadillac, Calvin Klein, Samsung, and HPE. He has won numerous industry awards and accolades, directed Super Bowl campaigns, and he has work that is featured in the permanent collection of the Cooper Hewitt Museum in New York. My interview with Joe Wright is coming right up. But first...
Bored with your boring cardio? Stop pedaling that snooze cycle to Nowheresville and try some cardio that's actually fun. Supernatural Fitness, available on MetaQuest. Isn't that right, Jane Fonda?
Cardio will never be boring again.
Sweat to the beat of thousands of chart-topping songs inside stunning virtual landscapes.
Bet your stationary bike can't do that.
Visit GetSupernatural.com and join the next fitness revolution. Supernatural VR Fitness, only on MetaQuest. Rated Teen for Teen.
Behind those cozy nights at home, thousands of employees at BP go to work every day. People producing more U.S. natural gas. People building grid-scale solar capacity. People turning landfill waste gas into pipeline-quality renewable natural gas. And people delivering all of that power where it's needed. They're part of the more than 300,000 jobs BP supports across the country. Learn more at bp.com/investing in America.
Joe Wright, welcome to On Brand.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here and chat with you.
You know, I always feel like this is a cop-out question, but whenever there is a business, an agency, a brand studio with an interesting name, and to say nothing of the fact that you're someone that loves talking about story, I have to know the story of the name Sibling Rivalry.
Yes, absolutely. It's actually something we get asked a lot. I founded the company with Mikon van Gastel. He is from Holland. And I think, honestly, it came from a couple of different places. I think that Mikon and I knew each other for 10 or 12 years before we started Sibling. And we both have older brothers back in Europe who are both 4 years older than us. And I think Mikon and I have quite a kind of fraternal kind of relationship, actually. And we were both, during the 12 years that we knew each other before we started the company, we were both working at kind of competitive companies. He was at Imaginary Forces, I was at Trollback and Company. And we would often pitch against one another. And there was definitely a healthy rivalry kind of going on between us. I always wanted, if I knew he was in the pitch, I always wanted to beat him and vice versa. So I think it's kind of stemmed from there. And then also we just love the idea of, like I said, this idea of kind of a healthy rivalry, a sibling rivalry, which is pushing what's possible. So I think it was kind of a combination of things, but it just, so that's a kind of actually quite long-winded answer, but I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into where the origins of the name came from.
Well, on one hand, I'd say mission accomplished, because it sounds like it is used to kind of draw out more information about you and the business and your approach as well. So sounds like it works from that perspective. But I'm curious about the idea of, you talked a bit about this, and I wondered if you'd say more about the idea of kind of because that was the general dynamic in my head was that one of rivalry, of the kind of push-pull.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a pretty strong connection to the work that we as brands have to do in order to stand out at one of the hardest times for doing that. So, how do you bring about a productive push pull?
Yeah, I think the push pull is super interesting actually, and I think you need it, right? You need to have the kind of two sides. I think when you're working with clients, with brands, you need to have a little bit of friction and tension, but in the right way, right? You're constantly, you know, going down different paths and exploring different avenues, or to promote a brand or to evolve a brand. And I think that relationship and that that kind of way of being in a room or discussing things together and pushing the boundaries is super, super, super important. And we look to do that with our clients all the time. I think we take them on a journey, and you should never just kind of settle for mediocre, right? I've got this, there's a phrase I love always, which is good is the enemy of great. You can get to a place where something's good, but that isn't what we're looking to do. We're always looking to get to a place beyond that. And in order to get there, sometimes you've got to make your client feel uncomfortable. Sometimes you've got to pressurize them, and you've got to ask questions of them and the brand. And that's a very healthy thing to do. And I think if you have a good relationship with your client, you're able to feel comfortable within that space. And I think that's for us is kind of the holy grail, is working with people where we're able to feel comfortable in the arena of asking questions. Sometimes they can be difficult questions, but having a healthy debate between us.
So, as this episode comes out, we're starting a new year. And in looking at that year ahead, I think what you just said about questions is something that is where a lot of us are at right now. As you think about the questions that a brand should be considering in standing out in the new year ahead, what is top of mind for folks to consider?
In my mind, I mean, listen, there's been a lot that's already gone on. I think that, for me, it's really about a clear, consistent message, and it's a trust combined with a kind of emotional connection, right? At the end of the day, brands are just people. We often look at brands as being this entity, but behind the brand is people, right? And there are internal teams working basically for an external audience. And so at the end of the day, it's actually quite simple. There are people connecting with other people. It's a very human centric kind of connection. And I think that's, for me, why trust and this emotional kind of thread is so important. And I think also consistency. Brands need to be consistent in order to create a relationship with people. There's this fact that it takes 8 to 10 interactions, and this can be with a brand or with a person, to create a relationship. So I think consistency is absolutely key when it comes to how brands operate and stuff. And, it's funny, like I said, there's been a lot of, obviously the whole Jaguar debate has been raging for the last kind of, few weeks. And, there is I think a lot of that argument is about a legacy, taking a legacy brand and putting a completely new spin on it. So I think people are in a little bit of this place of everyone's trying to figure out where to move the needle a little bit. But I think there are a few core truths that you've got to stick to. And like I said, I think that consistent message And that honesty is very, very important.
So you brought up the Jaguar piece
Yes.
of it. So what's your take on what happened there? It's come up in our recent episodes, and it's almost as though we have a little casual series about it going on here. But give us your take. Is it a total brand fail? Is it it missed the mark? Is it everybody's blowing this way out of proportion? What's your angle there?
I don't know. Honestly, I think it's a little bit of everything. At the end of the day, you know, there's an argument that they've abandoned legacy, right? In an
Right.
attempt to stay relevant and connect with a younger audience. And to me, if I'm honest, it does feel a little wide of the mark, right? Uh, I think it feels like it's trying a little bit too hard. I think it almost like feels slightly dated visuals and abstract messaging that lacks a certain amount of clarity. So, but on the other hand, on the counterpoint to that, there's no such thing as bad press, right? So, of course, they're getting a lot out of this, whether it's good or bad. Ultimately, it's exposure. However, I think at the end of the day, you have to judge a brand on the long term, and especially a brand like Jaguar that's a legacy brand, that a brand that has history. And I'm fascinated by brands that have history. They're some of my favorite brands because I think that they have a foundation and a kind of cornerstone that they can always go back to. So I think the big question for Jaguar is, where does this end up in the long term? That's where a brand either succeeds or fails. It's not about this sudden moment we're in now where everyone's talking about Jaguar, and at the end of the day, that you could argue is a good thing for them. I think it's really what happens to the brand when all of this dies down. Where is it in 10 years' time? I think that's where the big debate is for me, in my minds. And at the end of the day, brands are either icons or they're challengers. And this almost now feels like a challenger brand. But I don't know. Who's to say? Maybe it almost dropped into that status because it had lost its kind of veneer and it was not doing that well as a brand and it needed this injection. So I don't know. I'm a little bit on the fence about it. To be honest with you, Nick, I can't. It's really, some mornings I wake up and what they've done angers me. Other mornings I wake up and I go, I don't know. Maybe there's something in it.
Well, it's almost like in hearing you walk through that, and it kind of gets back to that earlier idea that you were talking about the danger of kind of just being good or good enough. And it's almost like, we focus on this binary of it's a win, it's a fail. And if anything, it almost sounds from what you're saying is it's an opportunity. We were talking about Jaguar, we weren't
Yep.
before. And
Yep.
if you're not growing, you're doing the other thing. And so what comes of this? Are they going to use it as a springboard to start a new conversation, a different conversation, like you said, shifting gears from being an icon to a challenger? Or will this be the kind of beginning of a death spiral?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I kind of feel like it's a little bit could potentially be the nail in the coffin, but once again, who am I to say? I think, I was talking to someone just recently, and they said something great to me, which was the middle of the road is the best place to get run over, right? And I think it's a great line, right? You're almost better to take a big swing and get it wrong rather than just succumb to kind of mediocrity, right? So I think there's definitely an argument to say boy, have they done a big swing, but there's definitely an argument there for that. Um, uh, where it goes, I mean, listen, I'm not, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say where it's going to go. Like I said, for me, it does feel like a little bit of a desperate attempt. I also feel like if you're clearly going for a younger audience, but you've got a product that's actually on the very high end price wise, that seems like a little bit of a disconnect to me. So this younger audience, can they afford this product? I don't know, and obviously we know it's not, a brand is not just about every single sale they do, a brand lives beyond that. But yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to watch where the brand goes,
On Brand will be right back after this.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Hennika Watkis-Porter hosts The Entrepreneurial You, empowering entrepreneurs with insights on leadership, business, and success. Hennika, tell listeners what to expect from your show.
So we provide innovative business strategies and practical solutions to common entrepreneurial challenges.
And where can people subscribe?
Find us at hennikawatkisporter.com, as well as the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcasts.net, or search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
Now, back to the show. Your work is centered around story and authentic storytelling. And literally someone just yesterday said to me, all of marketing is story. And story is everywhere, and story is key. The challenge is I feel like sometimes we run the risk of making it like a lowercase s story and making it just another generic marketing concept in our bag of tricks. So when it comes to authentic brand storytelling, what does that mean to you?
I think it just means, it comes to me, it's kind of about connection, right? Connecting the dots between kind of thinking and making. This kind of continuous interplay between strategy and design and authenticity. I mean, it's actually funny, right? I'm kind of getting sick of the word authenticity because it's almost like an overplayed word, but I do think authenticity is a very, very kind of important aspect of it. Because I think people want things that they feel a genuine kind of connection to. So I think brands generally have to it's kind of what makes them stand out. In a way, I think transparency also, not just authenticity, but transparency. And transparency doesn't always mean perfection. I think that's the other thing that's really, really important. So I think it's having that consistency, like I said before, and then creating a relationship, and having that kind of, honesty that is going to do it. And I think if you look at some of the, just talking, about Jaguar and kind of brands with legacy, if you look at some of the great ones, I don't know, I just was thinking about this the other day. It makes me think back to the kind of Levi Go Forth campaign from 2017 that Wyden did. And it was such a great kind of campaign because it took the brand, but then put a new spin on it. It kind of imagery of youth and rebellion. It was almost like a re-declaration of independence and an invitation for kind of young pioneers to create a new portrait of America. I think it was the perfect combination of embracing the future whilst respecting kind of what had come before. And I think that's with storytelling, I think that's what people want. They want to have that kind of connective tissue and to feel like it's not just something that's coming out of the blue, but it's something that is threaded through everything that the brand has stood for in the past, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think that is so important and almost offers, like you were saying, a counterpoint in the Levi's example to the, I promise we won't talk the whole time about Jaguar, but the Jaguar fail of something that when you're talking about pioneers, there's something very specific that they're trying to say. Instead of just trying to like shake up a bunch of stuff and say, hey, look at that. Isn't that different? And there's not really a there.
Yeah, and I also think, if you look at, I think Volvo, for example, is another great example. They've done an amazing job over the last 8 years or so because they've stayed true to what they've always stood for, which is quality and safety. And then they've combined it with a lifestyle that people can really relate to and aspire to, right? And the design becomes very kind of timeless. One of my favorite ones of Dieter Rams. Dieter Rams's principles of design. Good design is timeless is one of them, and instead of bravado, it's really interesting. Their new campaign, I don't know if you've seen the new EX90 campaign that Volvo have just brought out, but it kind of it envisions the potential future of an unborn child, all under the idea of safeguarding life's precious moments, which is what Volvo is all about. But instead of bravado, which is what Jaguar is showing, it actually shows vulnerability. And I think that's when, coming back to storytelling, great storytelling never goes out of style. And it allows us to find that kind of true connection. And I think to show vulnerability as a brand and transparency is kind of what people are looking for now, rather than the stuff that just feels surface. People want to get more under the surface with things that truly resonate. And to me, that's when kind of legacy is done right. That's when a brand has really done their homework, they've stayed true to their principles, but they've modernized and become, very relevant to today's environment.
I love that you tossed transparency in there, because I think all these words run the risk of, like you said, they're quick things to sign off on. We like the idea of that. And but like, what does it really mean? And what it means is being vulnerable. And then that's, if we were to say that to the folks behind a lot of brands, people might be compelled to say, "Well, I didn't mean that." Not that. That's scary. We don't want to do that. But certainly something that it needs to be considered. And I love the Volvo example too, because I think it's, we're kind of drawn to Volvo's all about safety, but really the complete story that they're telling there really speaks to the other side of that. And all stories are about a point A to a point B.
Yes. And it's a human story. It's a human story, right? And I think, again, going back to this idea that, not the idea, but the fact that brands are people. Brands are people, not this faceless thing that just exists, right? And again, I think the human, at the end of the day, there's nothing without the human connection. And I think Volvo have done just an amazing job of kind of tapping into that.
No, I love that, and the connectivity to what you said, it being a human story as well, and that's it sounds like I'm trying to be funny, but the more we move away from that, those kind of traits and behaviors, the less human our stories become, and that's how we get away from authenticity as brands.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So as we look at this year ahead that we're facing, where there's even more uncertainty in a lot of different places, and I do joke that marketers we're kind of used to dealing with uncertainty, but is there anything about this year's kind of edition of uncertainty that, as you talk with organizations, that brands should be thinking about that they may not be?
Yeah, I think that, it's obviously a very saturated market out there, right? I mean, and there's a lot of turmoil going on. I think if you look at CMOs, for example, their lifespan is very short in companies now. I was reading something the other day. It's like a year to a year and a half, right? So someone comes in, they try and change everything or start to change everything, at least, and then suddenly everything, someone else comes in and they want to put their stamp on it. So I think it's, there's a lot of turmoil in that, in that, on that front. And in a way, I don't think it's about necessarily reacting to the competitors, but it's connecting with people kind of on a deeper level, And to do this, you kind of have to leverage creativity. You've got to be relentlessly curious and kind of pushing your client. And at the end of the day, I think it's also about being unapologetically true to your purpose. And again, going back to kind of customer-centric in your storytelling, because everything within the brand is obviously kind of changing. And I also think, people are constantly looking to kind of sharpen what they're doing. The brands are looking to kind of like, it's almost like that because the CMOs are coming in and leaving. It's almost like rebranding has become kind of like a resharpening in a way, rather than kind of throwing everything out and redoing things from the start. So I think, it's definitely tough. And I think at the end of the day, you've got to stay true to your central kind of core beliefs. And that's the thing you have to keep going back to, because with all the change that's happening around that, if you start to get too swayed by that, then I think the focus gets lost.
Yeah, like that's the other the brand side effect of the CMO turnover is you run the risk if that you've got a brand that is almost as chaotic as the C-suite.
Yes, exactly that. So you have to kind of almost rise above that in some way,
Yeah. So I am still smiling from my new favorite quote that you said earlier, that the middle of the road is the best place to get run over. But it is now my pleasure to get to ask you, Joe, for a brand that has made you smile recently.
Well, I'm going to be unapologetically self-promoting.
I like it. Go ahead.
in this, I'm actually going to choose a brand we've just finished working on called Philo. And Philo is a streaming service. And we crafted a new brand strategy, brand voice, and visual identity for Philo. And I think what's interesting, the streaming sector is kind of very generic. Everything kind of tends to be the same. And we went for a very alternate approach, using a very bold black and white palette paired with whimsical hand-drawn animations. So it's very, very different from everything else that's out there. And alongside of this very different visual aesthetic, we introduced this tagline, which is a better way to TV. And we love it because it kind of forefronts access, ease of use, and all of this happening at a really incredible value. So it's just it's a brand that has a lot of fun. It's, like I said, it's whimsical. We've really pushed it out from a kind of full spot to all the digital and media, digital assets, and it's something that very much puts a smile on my face. I've got two young boys who are 11 and 7, and I think they've watched it about 300 times. They literally ask me every day. They're like, "Can I see the Philo piece again?" So it definitely puts a smile on my face. It puts a smile on their face. So that's one that I would definitely highlight.
I love that last point about it making others smile there as well. I think that speaks to the power of the work as well. Joe, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
The best place is just go to our website, siblingrivalry.com. And we're a very unique kind of company in the fact that we're made up of a brand agency, a marketing studio, and a production company. So we do everything from strategy and positioning all the way through campaign platforms. And then we've also got a full-service production company with a roster of 14 directors that are directing commercials. So we're, live action filming. So you'll get a really good idea of the company and what we stand for, and how there's a beautiful synergy between these different kind of verticals of the company.
Awesome. Well, we will link up to that in our show notes, which folks can find at onbrandpodcast.com. Joe Wright, thanks for being on brand with us.
It's been great to be with you, Nick. Thanks so much.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week. I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.